Welcome to week 2, day 5 of the summer 2025 database driven web development course. I'm Jim Kaufman with Rankin Technical College. So, first, want to start out a few different announcements. Kind of the first one here is Google I/O annual conference is this week. It's free for online. There not be a lot of things that would overlap too much with this course. Nowadays, a lot's about AI, but just kind of wanted to introduce you, because many of these different providers, organizations have conferences throughout the year, and especially the ones that are online can be free. Sometimes they're not, but a lot of times they are. And Google I/O, if you go in person, you're going to be paying, but if you go online for the online sessions, it's basically free. And like other organizations have them as well. But I'm going to just show you a little bit the Google one, and maybe I'll point out a couple things. It's obviously optional, but just want to kind of introduce you to that a little bit, especially in the future when you find your certain area of expertise, so to speak, and what you're doing and some position somewhere, and though there's it can be very beneficial for you in the future, or even before then. But I'm going to point that out a little bit. Also wanted to mention that originally I had the hands-on test scheduled for this week, but that lab, the 1-02 lab, basically the second lab, that's pretty substantial. It's about 16 pages. And doing that with the hands-on test seemed a little too much this early on. So I went ahead and just going to move that to next week. And hopefully it'll be a little better, but you may not be happy with me next week because there'll be a lot to do next week as well. But to mention, because of next week, also next Monday's Memorial Day. But so we won't have a live lecture that day, but I will have all the assignments. All the assignments will be available. And I do want to mention, especially to the students who are in this course that haven't been on, haven't taken online. So there's students that are in this course that have been going to the in-person classes for the other courses, and online's a little different. Where basically holidays really don't count. It doesn't mean that you have to work and do work on that holiday. It just means that the number of days, gets added up. It's just when for in-person classes, they don't count holidays, right? Pretty much the school's closed, they don't count it. But for online courses, it's just the way it's structured. That basically Monday through Friday, no matter if it's a holiday or not, every day's counted as a day for an online course. So, like I said, Monday morning I'll have all the assignments, the hands-on test available to you. Obviously, it's a holiday. If you don't want to work that day, that's up to you. That's your option. But I'll have everything there Monday morning for you if needed. So also today, the bulk of what we're going to be doing today is just going over Node and Express. And Node and Express is, we got the MERN stack, which stands for basically Mongo, Express, React, and Node. And so the Express and the N are the E and the N in the MERN stack, right? And then also today, what I wanted to do is with the students that are with me online live, I want them to be beneficial for us to go ahead and go through getting the coupon for the Google Cloud credits, download the SDK, make sure that's working. Also download Postman, which is a tool that we'll be using. And I also want to kind of show you the project setup for this lab, which the 101-02, because basically this is the first lab. This will be part of your final project. So we're not going to be, we're just used to always, for the most part, checking in the labs and within a lab folder and having names called the lab. But basically, you're going to want this in the root directory of your final project. So I'll just show you. I have some of the previous students. I'll show you their folder just so you can see. You basically, it has to be a certain way for everything to work. So I'll show you that. So okay, let's look at the Google I/O here. Let's look at that first. Okay, so this is the Google I/O conference that starts this week. Join us May 20th through 21st. I'm already registered, but I haven't signed in here. Well, I'll go ahead and sign in and see how it looks a little different here. But this is basically the home page for the Google I/O concert. It starts in 1 day, 2 hours, and 52 minutes. So it has some different sessions and so forth. These are kind of the areas of content, Android basically for, like Android devices, phones, right? This conference will be a lot very centric to AI. AI is a big thing nowadays, obviously. Then they have the web stage and the cloud stage. So let's just view all the content here. So there's some things here. I'm not going to go through all of these. I'm just kind of pointing out some things that maybe somewhat reflective that could help you maybe in this course a little bit. So on the web side of things, obviously what's new in Chrome. If you're using Chrome, I know some students use different browsers, but if you're using what's in Chrome, it's always good to know what's new in Chrome. They make a lot of times right before I/O or during the I/O, Google will go ahead and announce different new tools they have or new updates to software. They tend to make a lot of new software updates right before this I/O conference. So it's beneficial to see, look at these things. But this would be a good one. What's new in Chrome? I don't know what this is really about. Building a rapid evolution of web features. Okay, yeah. So that's another one that could be beneficial. Now here it's talking about what's new in Angular. So Angular is another technology that's similar to React. And, I know I mentioned this before, but just to mention again, React is the R in the MERN stack. Well, if you take that R and replace it with an A, it's called the mean stack. And that's probably the second most popular one. MERN's probably the most popular. And then means is probably the second most popular in this area of. So it's still using Mongo. It's still using Node and Express, but you're just using Angular instead. Now, Angular is used more for like large enterprises. It's a little more. It's a little more involved. It's a little different of a little different of a technology. So it takes more expertise. Obviously, if you learn React first, then Angular will be a little bit more easier to grasp. So not that you have to look at this, but if you have the time, it's and a lot of these sessions they have on I/O, you can look at them live, right? Like this one's going to be, and this is Pacific time, so make sure you adjust for Central time. But here's May 21st. This is when this one will be. But a lot of these, and not all of them, will be actually recorded. They record them, and you can watch them as YouTube videos later. But there might be something you really want to watch, and it doesn't end up being recorded. I don't know how you can tell. I don't know if they really designate that certain ones will or will not be recorded. So, but that one's interesting. Next here, just kind of wanted to mention. So what Next.js is really it's kind of it's something that sits like on top of React. It also sits on top of Angular. It's another framework. And I don't want to get into too much of this stuff. But like I said, probably the important, good ones that, might be really beneficial is the Chrome one here. What's new in the web? I don't know what this all entails. The web UI is kind of a different, Google has a lot of their own technologies, right? And, and also, I also want to mention that, as far as in technology nowadays, things can be very overwhelming. So please, please don't get overwhelmed. I mean, it's easy to get overwhelmed just what we're doing in this course, but there's so many things nowadays, and there's so many different companies that have their own frameworks, their own ways of doing things. So, please don't get overwhelmed. But, sometimes some of these things you can, just watch little pieces of stuff. So, you might not learn a lot, and, and don't feel like you may not even use it. But, just it's kind of builds up a lot of knowledge over time, just watching little things here and there, okay? Gives you a little more insight into how things work and options that are available to you. So I did point out the Chrome and the web one. Also, this is probably would be a really good one, the Chrome developer tools. Do more. I'm sure they'll have a lot of tips on how to use those, and that's very beneficial, especially when you're trying to debug stuff within the browser. And some of this will be, later on within this course, we'll be doing things where we'll be doing authentication and stuff like that. Password, we'll be hashing passwords to make them secure and things like that. Some of this other stuff could come into play as well. I think for the cloud stuff, I don't know if there's not all these things aren't necessarily for like beginner or entry or like if you don't know anything about Google Cloud, a lot of this isn't going to really help you. You'd really also kind of you kind of need to know the basics of Google Cloud before you really got into this a little bit. But obviously, we're going to be deploying a little bit of, we're going to be just doing some, a simple way of deploying stuff to Google Cloud. We're not going to be getting into all the a lot of the internal workings of Google Cloud. It just would be too much in this course. But there's I don't know if there's anything here in the Google Cloud thing that I could just say, hey, yeah, make sure this would be a really good one to watch. Obviously stuff's always good to learn. Maybe what's new in Google Cloud might be a little confusing for you because you kind of have to understand a little bit before you know what's new in it. But, it might be, still beneficial. So, and like I said, a lot of this stuff is about AI nowadays. If you wanted to, Gemini API, this is a big one. And I'm going to go into Gemini API just a little bit within this course. I'm going to go into that a little bit. But, it's up to you what time. And, you've got other things to do as well, I understand. And it's more important just to get things done in this class than anything else. Okay, so that's enough on that one. I do want to kind of also mention, just because I was talking about these conferences, so actually like this would obviously have been a really good one. And it looks like here I'll have to look to see what this is coming up. But I know that this one here, it says it's over. Do not miss React Summit. I guess this is React Summit here. But Node Congress was 2025 was over. This was like in April or something. This was last month. But so, there's these other conferences. And so maybe this one here, I'll go ahead and see if I can find out more about that. And hopefully there'll be some good things that'll be beneficial. So yeah, do not miss the React Summit 2025. So I'm assuming this one. It's saying the biggest React conference worldwide. I don't know if they're referring to the Congress or what. But this one would obviously be a very good one for this course. So I'll look into this a little bit more and let you guys know before this comes along. All right. Oh yeah. So yeah, I just mentioning one more time again. Originally, I had the hands-on test for this week, but I went ahead and moved it till next week. So this week you'll just have this lab assignments, which is like 16 pages. It's pretty significant. So we'll be having to do the setup and that, and be able to test. We'll be creating API calls, and we'll have to test them using Postman. So there'll be a lot involved in this. And then we'll also have this written test, which the written tests are called exams here for these. So, and like I said, I moved the hands-on test to next week. All right. So let's get started here on Node. So the important thing, and students that had me last semester in HTML course, we did a little, I did a little bit of a Node introduction and a React introduction. So this will probably go into a little bit more in depth in some areas. But so the students, we kind of already did a few little assignments before, so they got a little head start, so to speak. But everybody else that hadn't had me and haven't done anything on Node and React, you'll be able to catch up pretty quickly. So no worries there. The most important thing to remember, it's just always so easy to think, okay, well, Node is some kind of developer, some platform as far as a library or a framework, where the other ones are. React's a framework, Express is a framework, but Node itself is not. It's a runtime environment, right? So that's basically what you use Node. When we're talking about from a React standpoint, we use Node as a tool to help us create our React app. Okay. And so, but really when you're running a React application, when you're running a React app in your browser, it basically runs in the browser. When you're running it in the browser, it's not using the Node environment at that point. It is running within the Google Chrome browser, which is it's running in their V8 JavaScript engine. Okay, but Node for React is very helpful because it helps with the tools you can use. It helps with the tools that you can use when you're developing it, especially the Node package manager that we'll talk about here in a little bit. The Node package manager. So Node helps with that, okay? And it helps with doing things within like your Visual Studio Code. When you're doing anything within that, you're not in a browser, right? You're within, in that case, you're actually kind of using the Node environment, okay? Now Express, so we're talking about Node and Express and React. So React's all front end. Express is back end, okay? So Express, even though we can run some things in our local environment, we can run things within our local environment within our Visual Studio Code. We can run Express, but in a production environment, actually Express is going to be running on a server somewhere, okay? Your React app can be running on the browser itself, okay? It doesn't need a server to run, okay? It can run right in your browser, but it's going to be making calls, okay? And when we're using the MERN stack, it's going to be making calls from the React to the back end, and so that Express is going to be somewhere else, okay? And in our case, when we're going to be doing this Google deployment, this stuff's going to happen on Google's cloud, okay? But that Express is going to be running on that server, right? And that server doesn't have a browser, right? That server is going to have a Node, that Node.js environment. It's going to have a Node environment, so React will be running in that Node environment on the server. That's where Node really comes to play within this MERN stack, okay? Because that's the whole idea that before years ago, and it wasn't that many years ago, JavaScript was really only used in the browser. JavaScript was only used in the browser. But when Node came along, that gave the opportunity for Node for being able to use JavaScript on the server side as well. Okay, and Express is one of those web application frameworks that can be used within on the server side. JavaScript, using JavaScript on the server side within a Node environment. Now, Node's not the only one. There's other ones as well. I should say Express. Express is not the only framework that can be used on the server side running on Node, but it's the most popular one at this point. Okay, most widely used. All right, so Node.js runs the V8 JavaScript engine. Okay, the core of the Google Chrome outside the browser. This allows Node to be very performant. So the V8 engine was, it's very fast. It's very performant. It's very performant, and other Microsoft Edge also uses it. When Google created it, they created it and they open sourced it. So anybody can go grab that. If you wanted to build your own technology on top of the V8 engine, you could go do that. You can go download it. It's called Chromium, and you could go download it, and you can build something on top of it. And that's basically what Node.js did. They went ahead and used that open source project and created their own environment so that JavaScript can be run on the server side, right? One of the big things about Node.js, it runs this like single thread. It creates without creating a new thread for every request. Okay, so it has this main thread. But it will sometimes spawn off little threads to do other work. Okay, but it still stays on that whole main thread. Okay. So Node.js provides a set of asynchronous I/O primitives in its standard library to prevent JavaScript code from blocking. And when we're talking about synchronous and asynchronous, when you're talking about a synchronous request, it's basically you make a request, you wait. When it says synchronous, you make a request. Let's just say your request is to go grab a list of all the states. You call some API call, some application programming interface call. You make a call to get a list of all the states, okay, all the states in our country. So if it's a synchronous request, what it would do, it'll make that call. It's going to sit there and wait until everything comes back. Obviously, there's some latency, right? It's not instantaneous. It might seem instantaneous to us. It's gotten a lot faster because of faster internet connections and so forth. But there is a delay, right? And from a machine perspective, it can be quite a long delay. From a human's perspective, it may be pretty quick. That a lot of things come back very quick, right? But not all the time. Sometimes you're waiting for things, right? But synchronous is you're basically waiting. It's called blocking. It's blocking and it's waiting for that to come back. Whereas Node is asynchronous, so that when it makes that call, okay, that kind of is going to go happen on its own. It's going to go and happen, but that main thread is going to continue on, and it can be doing other things, waiting for that list of states to come back. Okay, that's what that kind of means when we're talking about asynchronous and Node. It has that single thread, right? It has that single thread, so when it goes ahead and makes that call for that API, it'll continue on doing other things. And then once it gets finished and that API call comes back with that, and we've kind of talked about this before, there's that event loop, right? And so that's going on, and so it will be put into that event loop, and it will have that available to it on that main thread, right? So Node performs AL operations like reading from a network, accessing a database. Database calls are slow. File systems are very slow. Trying to access something from your computer, from a program, there's a lot more involved than maybe what you might realize, because you have to. There's different. You got you got a Windows operating system or Mac or whatever. So there's layers to get from your code to get something that's on a file that's on your computer. Okay. Now, one thing too, also I wanted to mention is from a JavaScript perspective, when we were doing, like in the web technologies course, when we were doing JavaScript on the client side, you can't access the file system, right? Now, we did learn, when we did some of that Node stuff towards the end of that course, that actually Node has a file system module that you can use to access things on you, to write a file, to read a file, right? So that's one of the beauties of Node.js there, right? But back to this. So just reading things from the network, accessing a database or file system, it's actually very slow. And instead of blocking the thread and wasting CPU cycles waiting, Node.js will resume the operation when the response comes back. Okay. This allows Node.js to handle thousands of concurrent connections with one single server without introducing the burden of managing thread concurrency. So in other languages, and maybe you don't understand what that all means, and that's okay. But because concurrency is very complicated, but a lot of other programming languages, you have to handle all these different things. If this thread is doing this, and does it know about who it is, who owns this thread? There's lots of concurrency issues, especially when you're sharing data, and especially sometimes when you're grabbing something, well, that data can change, right? So there's lots involved in that, okay? And for some programming languages, you have to do a lot to handle that. And so Node makes that much easier, okay? Much easier to deal with. So Node has a unique advantage because millions of front-end developers that write JavaScript for the browser are now able to write server-side code, in addition to client-side code, without the need to learn a completely different language. So that's the big one. That's what we're talking about, that Node helps because it's an environment, and you can run JavaScript code within that environment on the back end, on the server. Right? Now, a lot before then, or you can still, I do want to mention, just because we're using the stack, the MERN stack. We're using the MERN stack, but that doesn't prevent. You can have a back end, you can have a front end that's something different. You can actually have a React application on the front end, and you can have something else besides Node on the back end, or there's all kinds of different things, options there, and you can actually even be using Express. You could be using your React and Express, and actually be using and not using JavaScript and calling some other things as well. That's not really common, but I'm just saying things can be customized based on your requirements and your needs. But in Node, the new ECMA script standards can be used without problems. You don't have to wait for all your users to update their browsers. You are in charge of deciding which ECM script version to use by changing the Node version. So yeah, we're not probably gonna, I'll show you that at some point. Not early on here though, but you can actually, and in some circumstances, you may get a job somewhere and there's some certain code that's written a certain way that doesn't, we're always used to getting the latest, which is always good. For the most part, it's always good from multiple reasons. Well, A, you've got the latest functionality available. 2, usually there's kind of security fixes in that along the way. So you always have the latest in that. But the problem is sometimes is when they're not always backward compatible. So sometimes companies write applications, and they don't just every time a new release comes out, they, oh well, that we can't use what we did before, let's rewrite everything. That doesn't happen usually in the real world. Obviously, any company that's very security minded, they're going to definitely identify, well, if we continue running in the current environment, is it secure or not, right? That's one of the things that happen, kind of an analysis type thing. But a lot of applications at different companies, were created one version, and so they're going to stick with that version. They don't just update that, without really, they're never going to, companies that really, have a good process, have good processes. They don't update things, like a lot of times developers do, or like we do as students, or just developers playing around, right? Because things might break something. You have to test things. You have to go through a process of testing, and it's usually a very rigorous process when you update from one version to another version, right? So you can actually prevent that. We're just getting the latest, but you can get older versions, and you just stick with that version until you deem it's necessary to update to a different version. Okay. So here it's saying you can also enable specific experimental features by running Node with flags. Yes. When they say flags, it's just kind of a command line argument. You're passing an argument to it, and so it's making certain experimental things available. So many versions have that. They have they'll have their base, and then they also have experimental stuff that's within that release, that by passing those flags you can use that. If you don't pass the flags, you're not going to be able to use that. So here's an example of a Node application. Now, this just basically creates a server. And like I said, the students we've already done this. We did this at the end of the Web Technologies course, created a new server. Okay. Things I just want to point out here, which is always important. So right here we're doing an import. So whenever you see import, the first thing you should be thinking in your head is we are using ESM modules, right, as opposed to CommonJS. CommonJS is the older way to do it. Okay, CommonJS ESM modules is the new way. Whenever you see import, you know that you are at least attempting to use, right? You're attempting to use ESM modules, okay? If you see require, that's the CommonJS way to do it, okay? I am going to show you here a little bit, because I do want to review this just to make sure that, one student did contact me. They were having a problem about trying to run for the lab assignments, the first lab. They were trying to run the .js files, and it worked fine with JS files with the require. But if you got an MJS file, you have to make sure you're using import and not the require. Okay, you have to use the import and not require. All right. Let me see what I want to do here. Do I want to write this real quick? And I think we will. Yeah, let me write this one in the Visual Studio Code. So first, I just want to review, like I said, about the modules. So I'm just going to do an index.js file here. Let's do an MJS file. And here I want to do just kind of wanted to review this. So kind of forget about the package.json file. We're going to pretty much be using package.json file going forward here, but I'm kind of just wanted to touch upon this specific, kind of a basic concept with modules and so forth. So if we run this, let me run this here. So this isn't really using that your package.json file. We're just what I'm wanting to do here is I just want to do a node. And one way to know when you're using your package.json file is you're using the npm command instead of the node command. Okay, we'll talk about that later. So here I want to do I just want to run this index. So I'm going to run this, and that worked fine. Now, if I change this, though, to that, okay, if I change that to that, so this still should be fine. Okay. So that'll be fine. Modules. So this is a .env one. Okay. So here's the one we're using require. So if I run this, this should run as well. And it does. But if I went ahead and replaced that, right? So if I did an import, so I imported this module. So whenever you're using a JS file, okay, and you basically have two different options here. But just in general, if you're using an MJS file, you need to make sure you're using imports. Okay. If you're using a JS file, you need to use require, but that's kind of using the old way. All right. That's using the old way. Okay. If you do want to use a JS file, okay, you can, but then what you have to do is you have to add modules to this. Okay. Type module. All right, let's see what happens. I'm thinking, is this actually going to use this or not? So this is an import, yeah. So it did. So actually, that wasn't accurate. I should have said that. It will still use the thing. So this was all because I added type module here. So you basically have two options. If you use an MJS file if you're using imports, and that's what you should be using, which is the ESM modules, you either need to call it an MJS file, okay? You either call it an MJS file, or you can use a regular .js file, but you have to add type equals module, just like that, right? So let me run that one more time. Okay, I didn't really want that to happen. Okay. Let's run that one more time here. And that worked fine. But if I go ahead and remove this modules part here and save this, then it's going to complain, right? It doesn't. It's trying to use an import when it's actually set up to be a common JS file. Okay, so hope I didn't confuse you too much on that. But that's just a common mistake, a common thing you gotta need to learn. Okay. All right. So back to this one here. So here we're doing an MJS file. I removed that. So I removed that. So let's go through this. So this is going to basically create a server. Okay, this is going to create a server using the built-in, and it's always good to kind of prefix this. It's not required. You can do it like this. All right, this will still work, but what it does is kind of helps you to understand that there's different kinds of modules that you can bring in, that you can import in, right? And I should say maybe there's three different. One is a built-in node module. Two's a module that you created within your code yourself, right? Something that you create in your code yourself, a different file that you're bringing in. And the third kind is third-party type modules, right? So, here, at least if you leave it like it was, okay, you know that this is a built-in Node module. Helps you so you don't, get confused about that. But that is optional. Okay. So this is creating a server, and this is a request and a response. Okay. And this is just basically part, if you can hover over this, you'll see that it's kind of, let's see. It's telling you it's a server, response here. I know that these can be kind of confusing, so don't get too hung up on these. Okay. And so here, what you're basically doing, this is just a simple, dirty way of doing this, just for an example of this. So this is setting the status code. Okay. Now there's different status codes. Okay. There's different status codes, and we can we'll look at that in a second. Let's just run this to make sure this runs. What do I have in here? Okay, that looks good. All right. Now here in the thing, just CLS to clear your screen. And then here I'm going to run what's called the npm command. And npm stands for Node Package Manager. And we're going to run, when you run that, we're going to run npm start. Okay, so we're going to do npm. And you have to do, well, it's more than npm start, it's npm run. You always have, that has to be the second thing. Then start. So anything in your script, okay, and you can have multiple things here within your scripts, okay. You always have to start it like this, npm run, okay, and then the command. And let's see what went wrong. Okay, yeah, I know what went wrong. That's because I deleted some stuff. So here we're going to do port 3000. And I think that's going to take care of that problem. It should. Nope. Let's remove this for now. All right. So let's save that. Let's run that one. All right, so now it's running. What were we doing? Hello world. So if I go, you have to go to the right port though, but let me go in my browser and pull that up here. Bring it over here so you can see it. It says hello world. Okay, hello world. I just went to 127.0.0.1. That's the kind of same thing as what's called localhost. Okay. That's the same. That's the address. It's actually assigned to what's called localhost. Localhost for that's relevant to your local computer, right? It's just kind of a basic standard there. Okay, so we know that's running, and that's fine. So, but we want to go ahead and bring in some other stuff here. Okay. So let's bring in. We want to import. .env. Let's do dot. Nope, not that one. Yep. And then from there, we want to make sure we do a config. So that it's just kind of required to do that. Okay. So here, when you're doing .env, this is a third-party library, okay? And so let's go real quick here and look at .env. So we'll talk about the Node Package Manager now, I guess. So the Node Package Manager, this is just a whole bunch of different modules that are available, okay? So that one there was .env. If I search for that, so there you go. And this is one that's obviously very, very popular. Let's go click on this one. You know, these are just the different, ones that are available, okay? And this says just, let's see, weekly downloads, 52 million weekly downloads. So this is used extensively, right? It's used extensively. But there's all kinds of different packages that are available. This just kind of gives you some information about that. Here's the repository, and here's actually a repository in GitHub for this. They're always open source. Okay. All right. Let's go back to our code. So that's a third party. This is a third party module. So we did that. Okay. So, but when you use this, I didn't, let me just delete this. So what this is all about, .env, it's basically reading environment variables from a separate file. Okay. Now, when you do this for this course, we're going to be fine. Having stuff in your .env, but a lot of times you're using your .env as something. You'll have different versions a lot of times for like a development version, a production versions, things like that. So obviously, if you had sometimes, and you use that environment variables for like your the path to your database, a username, a password. So some of that could be private stuff that you really don't want to be sharing, right? So a lot of times when you check in code, you don't want to also check in your .env file, and that's when you kind of use what's called a .ignore file. So you prevent that from being checked in, okay? Now for us, there's some things for me, for grading purposes, I kind of really need it. So, but all of our repositories are private repositories that we have. And the stuff we're doing isn't that critical from a security standpoint, but like we're going to be using the MongoDB. You're going to have a username and password for that. But for me to really test all of that, I'm kind of going to need that. So, but I just kind of wanted to point out that a lot of times the .env file it can have some secure things in there, and you really want to be careful about that. And a lot of times, especially a public repository, you don't want to be checking in your .env file, okay? So you can actually include that in a .ignore file, and so when you go and do your, when you commit your code, both GitHub Desktop, Tortoise Git, or you're doing command line Git, it'll ignore those and it won't check those in, okay? But here, what we're wanting to go ahead and do, we're going to create a new file, and we're going to call this .env. All right. And then in here, what we're going to do is we're going to create a variable. And let's do 3300. So it's a different, okay? So I'm going to create that variable there. And we come back here and we've got that, okay? And then what we can do here is we want to get that variable, right? We want to get that variable. So what we can do is we create a variable. We use the process.env, okay? And so here I'm going to go ahead, I'm just going to copy this over from before. So this is basically saying, basically using, whenever you use process.env, it's using this package, okay? Now for mine though, actually, I've already got this probably at a global, but you're really supposed to install .env, and I'll show you that here in a minute. But process.env, it's using this package. This package allows this to happen, okay? So this line here, if you recall, we went through what's called truthy and falsy, right? So basically that's what is happening here. It's basically saying, if this is true, if this exists, okay, use this, right? and we have a port of 3300. So if it exists, use 3300. Otherwise, use 3000. Okay. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to change this here to port. So we're doing that as variable. And then what else do I want to do here? Okay, yeah, let me put this here. And obviously, remember, you have to use the backticks. This is literal string literals, so you have to use the backticks to be able to use variables. Okay, so now we have that. So right now, there are ways to make sure that when you make changes, it automatically updates, but we're not doing that right now. So you have to actually restart the server each time. Okay, so let's restart the server here. And npm run start. We're going to run that again. And what did I do wrong here? Oh, okay. I did do that wrong, didn't I? I think I can do this and get away without doing this at all. Okay. There are different ways. I know it can be kind of confusing. So, but this import will work for .env, do .env.config. Otherwise, you have to do it differently, and that's where I was kind of doing it here earlier, where you do this .config. It's kind of a shortcut here. That you can just do that, okay? But like I said, now this is running, and if you notice here, it's got that port. So basically, now we're going to go to this port here, okay? Let me bring that up in the browser real quick. Make sure, and there it is. Hello world. All right. Now, the next thing I did want to go over real quickly here. So we were talking about the status code, right? So this is basically telling you different content type here. Well, this is telling different content types. So we're doing text.plain. You can also do JSON. There's different options here. Application, where we're returning different things besides just plain text. But in this case, we're just returning plain text from this. Okay. But here's the status code of 200. And so let's really quickly look at status codes so you can see that. So here's the different status codes. And you don't need to memorize these, and a lot of these you won't use. But the ones that are very popular, all servers, browsers have to understand all of these codes. They have to be prepared to handle if all of these different codes come back. They have to be able to be prepared to handle those. Okay. So 200 is okay. That's usually a success request succeeded. That's a 200, right? But there's other ones as well. I'm not going to go through all these, but just a few of them. 400 is like a bad request. And so what we're going to be actually doing later on in our code is we are going to be handling the request and responses. And so what we'll be doing is we'll be checking for things. If something gets sent that is in the wrong format, we're gonna create a 400 error, saying this, that, and returning that back to the calling application that, hey, this is a bad request, right? To the calling client, right? But there's lots of other ones, and another one that's very popular is like the 404. 404 is not found. So basically, if somebody's passing trying to access a web page that doesn't exist, right? It's going to be a 404 not found. Okay. So let me real quick here, let's do that. Let's just send back a 404. Okay, and then in this case here, I'm going to do a 404 error. I'm going to save this. And we're going to see how the browser's going to handle this, right? A little bit, right? But like I said, we'll be handling our code because we're going to want to do different things. But the browser also takes care of it from its perspective as well. Okay, so I'm just going to restart this real quick. I hope I did save this. If I don't save it, so I want to go ahead and restart the server. And now, if I go ahead and hit refresh. Let's see, did it still return something? Let's go look at, let's do F12 here. And let's do a refresh again. I mean, it worked just because, we already have this hello world. This isn't what you would do. You'd have a different message for a 404 not found, right? Sorry, this page doesn't exist. Please check what you did or whatever. But, and a lot of times when you test this kind of stuff, I kind of do want to mention that, when you test this stuff in the browser, so if I change this back to a 200, even if I just refresh this, all right, and then do developer tools, you have to kind of be in developer tools to see this stuff display, okay? You have to be in here and you kind of have to refresh it in here, okay, to be able to see it display. And in that case, I refreshed it. It's returned a 404 error. Okay. Now, if I put this back, we'll see what a good one looks like. I'm going to change that back to 200. Make sure I save it. I have to kill my server. We're going to do something later so that we don't have to do that all the time. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit refresh here again. And in this case now, you see we got a 200, which is a good status, right? Okay. How about, we've been going a little over an hour. How about take a 5-minute break and we'll come back and continue forward. Okay, a few more things I want to go over with Node before we move on to Express. So it's a good, it's important to understand that JavaScript's basically an interpreted language, okay? But modern JavaScript engines no longer just interpret them. They actually take it and they create their own compiled version of it. It's like it has some sophistication behind it. It's like if this is something that's used often, then I'm going to have to compile it to make it faster. So this is just some internal thing that happens within the JavaScript engine. But prior to these, more modern JavaScript engines, it was basically always just interpreted. JavaScript's an interpreted language. Just JavaScript, Python, there's others as well. Them are interpreted languages. Okay, they kind of basically get figured out as they're running, right? They get kind of figured out as they're running it. Whereas, languages like C# and that they're not like that, right? They're static, and so basically you find out at compile time you've got a problem, right? At compile time, it'll complain before it'll even compile it, right? So just something that's a little different. And JavaScript internally uses JavaScript internally compiled using the this is and basically the V8 engine, wherever that's used, it uses this just-in-time compilation. Okay. And just to mention, I don't know if so here's like these other JavaScript engines, and so just I want to make sure you don't get confused by this. So if you're using Chrome, it's using the V8 JavaScript engine, right? Anywhere you're using Node, you're running Node on a server, you're using the, it's sitting on top of that JavaScript V8 engine, okay? Now, but that don't mean that you can't run your stuff, your React app on Firefox that uses a different, or Safari, right, or these different browsers. It's just your React app's going. It doesn't really require Node. Your React's just going to be running within this browser environment using this JavaScript engine that's on these different browsers, right? So it's kind of a separate thing. I just want to make sure you understand that, React has to have Node. It doesn't. Your React app, which is basically your React app, is just going to end up becoming all static, all your static HTML, right? And that can run in any browser. Okay, so Node's really not important. Just kind of like I was mentioning earlier, from a React standpoint, Node is really just to help with development. Once you have that and you have your static files created of your React app, it just runs in the browser, right? It doesn't use Node. Node's not important. Whereas from when we were talking about Express, which we're going to kind of do a little lecture on Express here too, when you use an Express that's on the back end, that's running within that Node.js environment sitting on that server, right? All right. And just to mention, actually, Node is actually created with. So one thing that's always kind of interesting sometimes is actually Node has been created. So Node's created with JavaScript and also what's called C++ code. So it's C++, which is kind of it's more of the C++ is a lot faster than like C# in that, because it can directly execute within the operating system. Okay, it's just much more efficient. It's harder. You have to control things in memory, allocation, and all kinds of things. C++ is a little more complicated than say C# is, or Java, those kind of languages. But C++ is very fast, and so sometimes you'll see a lot of under the hood, so to speak. So Node.js is actually was written in C++. Okay, that environment. Okay. Let's see. Okay, I'm kind of done this. I'm not going to worry about these environment variables. What's the next thing I really want to look at here? Okay, we looked at the Node package manager. It's a standard package manager for Node applications. I guarantee this is as 21. I guarantee it's a lot more than that now. Installing all dependencies. Okay, let's see. We probably didn't install anything before. Let's see here. Here's this node mod. Let me see what happens. Is this going to fail on me? Sometimes things can be installed on a global basis. Let's see if that starts. No, good. And I didn't want it to. I expected it. Cannot find the package. So you ever, especially when you're debugging, it's going to be very important for you to get an error. You need to kind of read through it. Okay, sometimes it's confusing, understand, but it's basically saying you read enough of it, cannot find package, nodemon, right? Because nodemon hasn't been installed. You have to use the install, right, for that. So let's clear our screen here. And let's go back and look at the real quick. So here, package. We don't have any packages in here, nothing defined, okay? Just wanted to kind of point that out first before I run this. And then so here I'm going to do install, npm install, and I'm going to do nodemon, just like that. But before I do that, this is optional. You can do well, I won't say it's optional. You have to do either I or install. So you can do install, or you can do, oh, I didn't mean to do that. Or you can just do I here for a short, I don't know why that's. kind of frustrated me there. So you can do I here. So short for that. Either way, npm install or npm I for Nodemon, and you click this, click enter, and then you'll see it will create this node modules. Okay. And so Nodemon is one where it has lots and lots of dependencies. Okay. Here's your Nodemon package, but Nodemon relies on a whole bunch of things. Nodemon, one of the things that Nodemon will help with is, like, instead of having to restart your server each time, without having to restart your server each time, it will go ahead and refresh your server with whatever changes you made in your file. Okay. Now there is another way to do that with other flags, but there's a lot of assignments within our thing, and I'm just going to kind of stick with Nodemon for the most part in this course. It's a very popular one. It's used substantially, very regularly by developers. So, but like I said, Nodemon has a bunch of different dependencies. So what it always grabs anything that it's dependent on. And so this is a big one, right? Nodemon has a lot of other things. So this is one reason sometimes you want to do a dot new file, and you do a dot get ignore, just like this. And let me explain that. So then in here, you basically just mention node modules. Okay, underscore modules. And that way, when you check your code in, it's not going to check this in. Because actually, you really don't need it. Because, well, what I will do is I can come in even if this doesn't exist. So here, if I go back to our package.xml, we have something new in here. When we did that install, we had the Nodemon, okay? And obviously, we just did an install for Nodemon. This is just going to install the latest. It's just going to go grab the latest. So sometimes, like I was speaking about earlier, sometimes you're using earlier versions of Node, okay? Sometimes you're using earlier versions of Node. So if you are, then you need to make sure that you maintain this JSON file because you may want to make sure that even if there's an older version of Nodemon, just because it was tested with this and everything. So in some cases, you want to hold on to these things. But for our purposes, this is just a lot to check in. You can check in your node modules if you want, but it's much easier on yourself and takes up a lot more space if you just go ahead. And especially, we're just using the latest. But like I said, in a production, in a real-world environment, you may want to make sure that you have your package with all your different versions of your modules, because it could be important. Okay. But yeah, you can. I said that probably incorrectly there. So when you check in, you'll still have your package.json. So it'll have all your versions here. Okay. The fact is, though, if you can delete node modules and you're still going to be fine. Okay. So let's just kind of do that real quick. So as we kind of see that this worked, this installed everything. Oh, here, let's run it just to make sure. Run start. Now that we installed it, we were good. All right, so I'm going to kill this. CLS, just clear my screen. Now, if I come in here and I just delete node modules, right? If I delete this, now node modules is gone. If I try to run this again, it's going to fail, right? And that's expected because it's gone, right? But I'm just trying to explain that when you go ahead and do a dot get ignore and have node modules like that, it won't check it in. But then when you bring in the rest of the code here, what you can basically do is just do npm install. And what this is going to do is this is going to go ahead and grab. This is going to go ahead and grab all of these dependencies. So this is just one. This is just one module, but you can have, when you build as we continue in this course, you're going to have a lot more modules. So when you run npm install, it's going to go ahead and read this package.json file, and it's going to go ahead and install all your dependencies. So me just doing npm install. There you go. It created node modules again, and it basically did the install of this node mon there. Okay, but the first time you do it, right, this won't be there. The first time you add a new module, it won't be there. So you have to make sure you do the npm install nodemon, right? Or npm I nodemon, because you're installing. But once it's there, you can just do npm, like I said, if the no modules directory isn't there, it'll recreate all your modules from what's in your package.json file. All right. So let me just get rid of this, because some of the stuff was already there earlier. And I want to delete this. All right. We'll just leave that there and there. That's fine. To create a new node project, I know this first lab assignment, you actually didn't even have to have a package.json file. Okay, you didn't even have to have one. But for going forward, everything we're going to do, you're going to need a package.json file. Okay. What we did that first assignment was really just Java. It was really just executing JavaScript. It was executing JavaScript within the Node.js environment, but we weren't using really any packages. We weren't really doing anything, right? But moving forward, we're going to be using different packages. We're going to have to. It's going to be very important. We're going to be starting servers, all that kind of thing, and it's going to be very important that you have this set up as a using the. You need to have a package.json file, and we're going to be using npm to run things, right? So basically, to start out, you're going to do npm init, right? And that's going to create. So here I'm just going to accept the defaults version. That's fine. Yeah, let's just do that. That's fine. Yep. MIT. So that's basically going to create your JSON file right here, right? But you don't have anything else in there. And that's why you'll have to, and that's what you'll start from always in the beginning, and then you'll have to start adding things, right? So to run the server, we had to have a start script, and then obviously if you include any so right now if you run this, obviously it's going to fail because of these imports, right? So you'd have to go ahead and do that again. So like I said though, the import, you don't have to import node node specific modules, node built-in modules. You don't have to import those. Well, you have to import them like this. You don't have to install them. I apologize. You don't have to install them command line. NodeMon, you do have to install command line, right? So obviously right now you try to run this again. This ain't going to work. Well, for a lot of different reasons now. All right. I don't want to spend any more time on that. Okay, so did install. And you do want to kind of maintain. You want to work and make sure that you keep things clean within your directories. You don't want to just. So if you sometimes you might install some package and later on you say, I don't want to use this anymore. You really you should uninstall it, right? So you just do npm uninstall and then the name of the package, and so it'll uninstall it. So that'll remove it from. That'll remove the package from the node modules directory, but it'll also remove it from the package.json file as well. Okay, we just ran that. And here's this is kind of a popular module we'll be using, Lodash. We already did NodeMon. So here, what one does here. So let's just say you're going to be using NodeMon on pretty much all the stuff you're going to be doing, right? So you have like let's say you're creating multiple apps and stuff, and you're going all the apps you create, you're always going to want to use NodeMon for them. Well, what you can do is you can make it global, so it's available globally. If you don't do it globally, it's only going to be put in that node modules directory in the local directory you're in. Okay, if you do it global, it will at a higher level on your computer, so that whenever you started a new project, it automatically be available for you to use. Okay, and it won't be in that node modules. Okay, so there's some advantages and disadvantages there on that stuff. So, but a lot of times things that you want to do is like, especially anything that's development dependencies and stuff like that. Because like things like this, some of this NodeMon stuff, to restart the server. When do you care about picking up changes to restart the server? It's really only when you're developing. Once you deployed something, it's kind of a little different scenario. So just want to point that out. And if you ever want to see where it is, so this is a good one to enter here. So this will show you the directory of where your global ones will be. And so users, Proma, so this is short for ProMark Technology. It's kind of a company I had a while back ago that I ended up when I set up this PC here. But app data, roaming, NPM, node modules. So there's a so if I go to this directory, okay, it's going to have whatever global ones I have, okay. But usually that's going to be within your user group, within your users, whatever your username is, etc. All right. What's next here? And do want to point out, which I've already spoke multiple times, especially when you're looking for, you might use the internet for things, you might find some different code. You just have to always remember that if something has require, it's using the common.js files. So basically, you really don't want to use that. You want to be using the import versions. Okay, you want to be using import and not the require. Here's a kind of little fun one we can do. Let's just do this for the heck of it here. I think I already have this installed, actually. So this just kind of, let's go ahead and run this thing. So what this does is it just creates a little pictorial thing of a cow here. I'm going to show you that here. So it's just kind of a little fun little thing. NPX, cow say hello, and so it says hello. Whatever you pass is what it's going to say. All right. This is a good command, npm outdated. I'll just tell you if the modules you have are outdated. Sometimes you can do npm update. Sometimes you have to do it individually, but can be an option. If you have some old modules and you just want to update but running it will update everything. But I wouldn't always necessarily say for sure that it's going to update everything. All right, let's see what else is in here. I think we've went through enough. So a lot of the stuff with Node and that we're not going to be doing. We create a little server Node. We created a few things here and there. There's going to be some times we're going to use some Node modules as well. But we're going to be doing our servers actually. When we have a server, we're not going to be using a Node server like we created before. We're going to actually be using a React server, which is different. Okay, not React. I'm sorry, Express server. So, okay, let's get rid of some of that stuff. All right. So Express is a fast, unopinionated, minimalist web framework for Node.js. Basically, you're kind of doing some of the same things that you need to do. One thing you have to do for Express is you have to go ahead and install Express, just like it's it's an import, it's a module just like anything else, but it's a module that's kind of like it's a whole framework, right? So a lot of modules might have just some specific functionality, but Express is a key part of the MERN stack, correct? So I'm just pointing out, because like there's some things in this document are old, back to saying, I know I keep on saying this multiple times, so this is the old way, using the require, right? So you want to be using the import statement instead. So we're going to kind of go through a lot of this tomorrow when we're walking through the beginning of that lab. So I'm not going to do that today. But basically, what Express does, one of the biggest things is all about like using routes. Okay, and so what we're going to do is there's different kind of, we're looking at status codes, but there's also there's different methods. There's different HTTP methods. There's like a get is getting data, and then there's post and there's put. Them are the three most popular ones, and we'll look at them. Okay, and in this case, we're doing a get, and so what we're doing is actually we're going to have things set up where you can go. Actually, we're going to use a thing called Postman that's going to make a request based on the URL and based on what we're putting here on these files. So this one is just saying basically at the root level, return this hello world, right? This will be like our first one, and then from there we'll be, but for our lab we're going to have some other ones, and maybe I'll just show you that real quick. Well, not to digress here, but I think it's worth go ahead and check out this video, Coding Project Guarantee. It's basically telling you about creating a bug tracker, issue tracker, which I know I already mentioned before, and basically an issue tracker is when issue tracker or bug tracker can be used synonymously there, but it's basically when you're working in a software project. All software projects are going to have a place where you record problems with your system, and this could be, it could be actually one developer could be doing something and he notices a problem from what somebody else did, and you could be creating a bug for somebody else to fix something on your team, or it could be something that a user found, a tester found, a user once it's in production found, and right. So there's issue trackers and bug trackers used throughout the development process of an application, the early development all the way through. Usually, sometimes the early development stuff, maybe not so much like right at the beginning, but it doesn't take long, and you really start tracking things as you go. But once you get to a production, then everything has to automatically be tracked. And like you might have a third-party client that's using your software. They call up and they request things. Somebody enters a help desk ticket. It ends up becoming something that a developer has to look at, right? Some kind of a bug, an error, or it's just not working as like it's supposed to. It could be a number of things, right? So that's what kind of issue Bug Tracker is, and that's the need for that. But just kind of want to go down here, and this is what we're going to actually be doing tomorrow. And so we're importing Express, and this would be the correct way, right? We're using the ES modules. This is how you import Express with using EM modules as opposed to using that require, which is the common JS ones. But this is what we'll be creating, and these are going to be the different routes we're going to be using, right? So /list, it's going to bring back a list of users. There'll be all these, and these are all going to be, you'll be using this basically how you design your, or what you put in your URL string, right? You'll have in your URL string /register, okay? And this one, as you can see, these were a get, these are post, and here's a put, right? Here's a delete for deleting something. So we're gonna work on this tomorrow, but I just kind of want to show you what this kind of looks like here, okay? So back to this. So one thing, the / here, this signifies a root route, right? This is the root. So basically, when you've got a name, Google.com, that's your root, right? If you have a / and then you have other information behind that, that's not a root anymore, right? Your root's just like, basically your .com or .net, .org, whatever. It's usually the root, okay? So what this is doing, yep, so it's 202. This isn't really accurate what this is saying. For all the rest, the app response 404. It's not doing that, but it says that. But that's okay. Unless, it might be in here. Server, no, this is server running. So, but basically, you always say if it's not this, then you can always, what you do is have logic say, hey, if it's not found, then send back to 404. So you'll have a different one that'll have a 404, right? All right. So we already seen how you install a module. This is installing the .env one. And once again, this really should be an import, so that's a little dated. And here it's kind of showing you, like I was talking about, the .ignore file. So your .ignore file, you really want to make sure you have node modules in there. For this course, we're going to be using our private repository. So I wouldn't include the .env, but it's important to understand that it's best not to have that in many cases, because even if you're working for a company, even in your dev environment, you don't want to be sharing that with everybody, right? Is this something I want to share with everybody? No, because you have passwords and usernames, passwords, other security risk type information that you don't want to share, right? But for what we're doing, we'll probably only have, it's only going to be the Mongo, the path to your Mongo database, username, and a password for your Mongo database. And the only person, since they're private, the only people who can see it is instructors anyhow, right? So, but just remember, if you end up using your private repository, making it public, you probably should get rid of your .env file. So in that case, you probably want to do a .gitignore. Not that it'd probably be that big of a deal for your Mongo stuff. I'm sure that if somebody hit it enough, they'd just shut it down. Because we'll be using Mongo database, and we'll be using some free stuff. So obviously they, if it gets overused, like somebody's hitting it like a whole bunch of times, they'll stop that on their end. We'll look at this tomorrow, but there's some ways to do some more advanced type logging so you can really see what's happening in your application. So we're going to look at that. Yeah, this is doing install the debug. So we'll look at all this tomorrow. So the biggest part of really Express is basic routing. And routing is the process of determining how an application responds to a client's request for a particular endpoint. And so when we say an endpoint, we're talking about basically your URL, right? What's on your URL. So your URL might include, might have your domain name. In our case, we just have like localhost colon, what we're doing, 3,000, whatever, 5,000, whatever we're using. And then after that, you'll have a forward, you'll have a slash. And then after that slash, if you have the word list. So your list, that's your endpoint, right? Or it could be different things depending on what we're doing. We'll be using user ID, we'll be using bug IDs, things like that. So them are our different, and that would be considered our different endpoints. Okay. So for Express app is an instance of Express. Okay, it's kind of like instantiating it. Everybody's been in this course, obviously, has been in C# and that. Just kind of a little different concept, and kind of how the way it works. But basically, app is considered a instance of an Express, and you can call it. You don't have to call it app. You can give it a different name. Okay, but in this case, we're giving it. Let's see what we have up here. App. So app equals Express. You can call this. Some people call this router. Right, router.get, they do different things. It all depends on what you want to call it. You can call this whatever what you want. This is just a variable, but whatever you call this is basically an instance of Express. Okay. A method is an HTTP request method in lowercase, and that could be like get, post, put, delete. Path is the virtual path on the server, as viewed from the client side. Okay. Handler is the function that is executed when the endpoint is accessed. Okay. So basically, / is the root, right? And here we got a root. Now on this one here, we're doing a get, and we're doing a get / user. So that would need to be in your URL, right? And this is just kind of showing you an example of that. All right, let's see here. Worry about all of this right now. So, here's an example where you're doing what's called a use, okay? And then you're using, and basically this is for like if something can't be found, boom, it's going to default to here, and then it's going to set this 404 status code, so you can find whatever URL you're trying to use, right? So this is kind of for error handling, and we'll look into that as well. So here's one where you've got an error, and this is basically 500. It's for like considered a application error, a server error, okay? And that's basically so something's broke. It's not a bad request. Usually, a bad request or incorrect request, right? So there's difference between them, and we'll discuss all that later. All right. Let me see what else I really want to do here. We're going to really be going through Express a lot tomorrow. So the important thing is, Express is a web application framework. Um, it's fundamentally designed around utilizing different what's called it's around the middleware pattern, and what that is like Express enables you to build your application by actually like chaining together different functions. Okay, and the Express object itself acts as like a manager of this middleware, because there's other modules, other pieces of software that you can bring in. Okay, and it kind of acts as middleware. So, like when I say middleware, it'd be like stuff that's in between your application running on your server and maybe like your database, where you want to perform some validations before you write that data to the database, right? Or you want to, you read stuff from your database. You may want to do some validations on that before you pass that to the front end as well. Okay, but especially when you're reading something from the client side, you're going to want to check some validations, make sure that data is right, is that appropriate, and so there's some like middleware that you can use in between there. Okay, to do that kind of thing, different kind of validation packages. Okay. And those different validation, we're going to be using a couple of those, and those are for, those are for basic validations, right? And they're separate modules. Let's see what else. But the biggest, really, the core functionality of Express is routing. And we're going to be doing a lot of that tomorrow. So let's go ahead and what I want to kind of do with the rest of today is for the students who are online with me, if we can go ahead and work on, go ahead and get things set up, redeem your Google Cloud credits. Download and install google.sdk, because we're going to have to be using all this tomorrow. All three of these we'll have to be using tomorrow. Before we do that, though, I just want to show you something real quick, and I'm going to reiterate this a few times, just so you guys, when we get, I want you guys getting your directory structure set up right, so you don't want to be checking things in with lab folder names and stuff like that. So let me show you. I want to show you a previous students. Let me find that real quick here. So here's a previous student. He was in like the fall class. So here's his final projects folder. Okay. So like I said, we're gonna have there might be some labs that I might have put a couple lab directories that I shouldn't have. This is a different instructor set this up, and so I think he had his a little different than mine. But you only have some certain labs that are not really a part of the final project, but a lot of them will be. And the one that we're going to be doing this week is. So you want to make sure that, if you can kind of see, this is his basic folder here. Here's his package.json file. Here's his index.js file, right? .env file. Here's the routes. This will be all the Express stuff. Here's node modules. Here's a middleware folder where there's some specific modules that are used for middleware. Here's the front end and that. Okay, so just wanted to make sure that when we get things set up tomorrow and you commit this to GitHub, that you want to make sure that that you're doing it very, very similar to this. May not necessarily be there like that, but that's okay. But all this, you're going to want to, when you come into your final project directory, you want to see front end, okay? You want to see node modules. You want to see your routes, okay? Because that's how we're going to be deploying this. That's how this is going to work. You don't want to have it in different lab folders, okay? Different lab directories, okay? So this is like going to be the first lab. And then what's going to happen is, and what you can do when you check this in is, maybe you part of your message when you check it in, you just say lab 0102, right? Initial check-in, and then maybe you make other check-ins as well. But maybe you can do it like that, so there's a little bit of a tracing in what you did for the different lab assignments. Okay, we'll be doing it week by week, but it can get kind of confusing. So maybe it's best to kind of try to do it like that. But that's about it. Like that, you don't really want to have lab directories within your final project. And I'll speak about this again tomorrow just to make sure that everybody's understands this. So okay, so for the rest of today, if the students that are on with me can kind of work on these things, that'd be great. So we can make sure that if it's working for the students here, because as an instructor, I don't have this. This is kind of for the students. Mine is from an instructor's point of view, and it's different. So I can't really access this like you can, but I can help you with the Google SDK and that. But if you wouldn't mind, can you try to go ahead and see if you can get through the Google Cloud credits using the link there. And I'm going to pause it for the video. Okay, looks like everybody kind of claimed the credits there, so that's good. So for the Cloud SDK, click that link and then go to Google Cloud Installer. It'll download this installer. And here you just go ahead and click Next and click I agree. And this depends on if you want to do all users, just a single user. That's up to you. On mine, I'm just going to do a single user. You just include that. So what I would do here, Cloud Tools for, I guess maybe I didn't choose that, Cloud Tools for PowerShell. I'm kind of worrying because I kind of already have mine installed, so I don't know. And I don't think I would choose that one. You really just want the core library and tools. And then hit install. And that should be fine. And then after you have that installed, one thing is if you do have Visual Studio Code, if you have multiple versions, close them all. Close them all. If you end up having like a command prompt running, close that, all of them. And then you should be able to come in there after that. And either way, you should be able to go to maybe like a command prompt. And if you just type in, you don't have to, you just do gcloud, gcloud, like just like that. It helps if I have the C in there. And then, it's complaining. I don't have a command here. But I don't know how to get the version here. Let me check something here. Does DEF-V work? No. So you just do gcloud-v, and it'll tell you the version. So you should see that if you don't, because it's going to be in your path. If you have any problems with this, let me know. But one thing you want to make sure is after you install it, you close everything down. If you have any command prompts open, or if you have any Visual Studio sessions, close them all down. Because I actually had a problem with that myself. When I installed mine, I closed one of them down, but I had more than one Visual Studio Code open. I had two, and I didn't notice it, and I was wondering why it wasn't working. So. But make sure it works both. Like here, I'm just checking that command prompt, which is fine. But also, make sure that it's working in Visual Studio Code too, because actually is going to that's going to be using by default here when you create a new terminal. It's going to create a PowerShell. So -v, right? So, make sure it's working both places. So like here, like you can see this is within a PowerShell. The other one was command line. I just always check to make sure they're both working. Okay, the students who were live with me, everything kind of seemed to work out well for them. Please let me know if you have any questions about getting anything set up for the Google Cloud. Well, basically, two parts to the Google Cloud. Is one is you need to redeem your credits. The other one's downloading the Google SDK. And just make sure when you download that SDK, you close all your Visual Studio sessions, command prompts, anything like that. And so that it sometimes will hold on to that, and you need to close that, open it back up, and then you should be able, in your terminal, just type in Google G-Cloud space -v, and it'll give you the version number. So if you have any problems with that, please let me know. And besides that, the other one was to download Postman and create an account. Okay, download Postman and create an account, and so that's about it there. So please let me know if you have any questions, and that's all I have for today. And tomorrow we'll go ahead and start walking through that lab assignment. And like I said, that's like 16 pages long. We're going to walk through part of it, and you'll be completing the rest of it on your own. So, okay, well, have a good day, and see you later.